Regular meeting come to order for the City Kingman Airport Advisory Commission. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Anspoker,
Present.
Vice Chair Brackett,
Here.
Commissioner Finnegan,
Here.
Commissioner Gerlach,
Here.
Chair Hayes,
Here.
Commissioner Rucker,
Here.
Commissioner Stutzman.
Here.
We've got a quorum.
All right. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You all should have got copies of the minutes a few days ago in email, if not some other way. There's a lot of minutes in there. Anybody have any additions or corrections to the minutes? Have a motion.
I move. I've reviewed the minutes and move we approve.
I second it. Finnegan second it. Okay, all approved?
Aye.
Good nays? All right, good. The minutes approved. Consideration of public comments. We have two signed up today, both of them on the model airplane field, so that will be, I'll call those people up when we have the report on that subject from the airport manager. Someone else comes in, we may take that at a different time. So at this point, we have a airport staff report.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, welcome, and it's great to see you all for our meeting this month of September. First item on our agenda, or my report, is the airport general manager selection process. We completed the final interviews on last Friday, and the day before that, of course, we had an event at the airport. We thank many of you for coming out to that. The committee made their recommendations. The interview panel made the recommendations at the end of our interview session. Also, the candidates had the opportunity after their interviews to meet with the city manager for a short time. And so we expect that HR will be making an announcement this week. That's our expectation. Airport operational data update. Based aircraft, I have a number, not a range this week, or this month. Based aircraft's at 92, that's the best of our knowledge. And of course, that will fluctuate from time to time and as people come and go. But right now, our best accounting for aircraft base, that's hangar tenants, tie-down tenants, folks that are tied down on the FBO leasehold, our major business partners that have aircraft, is 92 aircraft. Storage aircraft reported this past month was at 199. So that's a little different than the 209 we had last week. That accounts for some of the aircraft that have left in two different ways, one by wing and the other by truck, because they continue to do teardowns over there on a weekly basis. Fuel flowage for the month of July, aviation fuels, 37,863 gallons is what's been reported. That was the same amount that was reported for last month, so we're going to look and see, check. It's odd that you have 37,000 gallons and it's exactly the same 2 months in a row, but that's what has been reported, 37,863 gallons. The total approved budget for the airport division of the Planning and Economic Development Department, we have operating expenses budget approved of $1,207,508, and capital portion of our budget is $950,000. So that gives us a combined adopted budget number of $2,157,508. As I mentioned, that $950,000 in the capital budget also accounts for $450,000 worth of grant money that we expect to receive. So that's not money necessarily out of our pocket. Generally speaking, the master plan, that's the master plan update grant, then the master plan update will cost something around $512,000, I believe. Don't have that number precisely in front of me. $450,000 of that will be federal funding. About $25,000 of that will be state grant match funding, and then the remaining $32,000 or something like that will be city funds, airport division funds out of our enterprise fund. So that's, if you take that apart, take that out, there's about $500,000 worth of approved capital improvements. And that's the various projects, and of course I'll report on those in just a couple of minutes. Airport finances. So I'd like to first correct the July revenues that were reported. I reported to you that we had $227,952.37. That number was actually, should have been $189,000, $65. Okay, let's get this right. 189er, 065.68. 189,065.68. And the reason for that correction is when I got last month's numbers from the finance department, there were elements in that revenue that were actually needed to be journal entry back into the previous fiscal year. So they were, because of the transition, we're doing quite well, but there's still some flux that we're experiencing. So that 189,000 is the actual, and then the remainder of that, which was in the neighborhood of the balance between the two figures, was actually captured, but it needed to be applied to the previous fiscal year. So there is your correction. For the month of August, revenues $95,803.04, 95,803.04. Airport revenues year to date, $284,868.72. 284,868.72 are the revenues year to date. Expenses for the month of August, $47,042. And airport expenses to date, $97,999. I'm also going to report to you encumbrances, and as I mentioned to you last month, I gave you a number that basically accounted for both our encumbrances and our expenses. But I'm going to report the encumbrances separate, because some of that money's been spent, some of it hasn't. The expenses that I report to you are actually money out the door. That's money that has been spent either in the month or year to date. The encumbrances represent other, like for example, a PO for equipment that we've already cut the PO, and so that money becomes encumbered in our budget and essentially is unavailable to us, but it hasn't been spent. So I'm going to, from now on, from this point forward, at least until my successor comes and may choose to do things differently, or you have a different request, airport encumbrances for the year to date are $200,166,000. Okay? Are there any questions on the financial, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission?
I have one, Joe.
Sir?
On the flowage fees,
Yes, sir.
are they based on what's delivered or what's sold? Because that's a round number, and it could have been so many truckloads, and it was the same as the previous month.
That's absolutely correct.
If that's what it's.
Usually it is what is delivered. And I can't say with absolute certainty how fuel is reported here because I've never investigated. But at all other airports that I've worked at, they report the amount of fuel that actually is delivered to them. If it gets delivered to them, it's going to get sold one way or another.
Sure.
It's almost, it would be a rare situation that any fuel would leave.
Yeah, balances out over the year anyway.
Affirmative. Yeah.
I think it should be the sold amount. Leonard, in his lease, has to report all dollar, because it's a percentage on his lease, so that would be part of that, and it should be the actual fuel sold, I believe, because we're getting the fuel flow, the 3%, so.
I agree, that's how flow is based. What comes out of the hose.
But I
delivered to
believe,
the customer.
yes, Leonard
Both
on his,
jet, nav gas.
on his reporting does it via the sold. We can ask him.
Yeah, I certainly will check. As I said, at other airports I've worked at, we have actually required fuel to be paid on what's delivered to the airport.
Get it quicker that way.
What's delivered to the particular fuel dispensary permit holder. Yeah.
Do we have a breakdown on what is avgas and what is Jet A?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Anspoker, not as yet. I do plan to make that request that we separate those two fuel categories out. I think it will help us in our, determination of the type of flight activity that we're seeing, but we have not as yet gotten that. We have a meeting with them next Monday or Tuesday. I can't remember the exact day, but one day next week.
For reference, it's probably 2 to 1 jet. Jet is 2 to 1 amp, is what Leonard told me.
I was thinking it might be even more.
Yeah.
Other questions, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission? All right, continuing. FAA and ADOT coordination. As your commission approved our ASIP last month, that has been submitted to the website and accepted by the, it goes into the ADOT website and then it's shared with the FAA. But we've sent it in. We've heard nothing back, which is not uncommon because we met, had a long, lengthy meeting to determine what the ASIP would contain, and so everybody was on board. So there were no surprises. I believe since our last meeting, we have actually executed the master plan grant from the FAA. That was actually approved by council and signed by the city manager, and I don't remember the exact date, but it was in August. We also are in the process of applying for the matching grant that I spoke of to ADOT. The aeronautics group at ADOT will be eligible for half of our state share or half of our local share requirement. We closed out the previous grant. We actually got a closeout letter from the FAA in this last month, which is the final. We're all done. All of the accounting is settled. All of the money has changed hands. And so that was actually for the taxiway Charlie renovation. I believe it was AIP 24, either AIP 24 or 27. But we have no current grants open other than the master plan grant with either the state or the FAA. So we're good and current on grants. And that's very important that you are timely when you're dealing with the FAA, especially the airports, any division, any line of business, the FAA. But with the airports division, their performance is measured by how well both the region and the local district office perform on grants, getting the money out the door, getting it spent, getting grants closed out. And that has an effect potentially on the amount of money that both the region and the district get in the grant program and the ASIP, the Airport Improvement Program funds. And so it is always in an airport's best interest to perform well and expeditiously on their grants. It lets the region and the district know that you're a good grant performer and that if they grant you money that you're going to perform well and make everybody look good and continue to help attract the most amount of grant funds to the region. So it has nothing specifically to do with the report. It's just something that you always want to keep in mind, that it's good to get that stuff taken care of quickly. So anyway, we're in good shape with everybody right now. Part 139 certificate acquisition, I've made no progress on that this month. There's been too much other stuff going on. As you are aware, and I've reported previously, we have made application, and we're in the process of revising our certification manual. We have made some progress on some of the activities, but we're working on that process. And as you recall, we had a surveillance inspection from our FAA 139 certificate inspector from the Safety and Standards branch, and there were some minor deficiencies. We continue to chip away on that. This month, we settled the fact for fuel system inspection. So part of the 139 requirement is that the certificate holder inspects the fuel dispensing equipment and fuel storage equipment of the various fuel handlers on the field. And so we actually involved the City of Kingman Fire Department as well as the Northern Arizona Consolidated Fire District to do that in concert. So they came out and did all those inspections. That was one of the deficiencies. That's been taken care of. Some of the paint's been taken care of. The 3-inch lips that were identified adjacent to taxiway Charlie have been taken care of. We're just about there. Really the thing that remains is a repaint of the runway. We were cited deficient on our thresholds. There were a couple of hole bars, and I got those cleaned up right away because that's pretty critical. Not that the other markings aren't important, but they're larger in scope that we need to do. So they identified the leadoff lines and the thresholds on our primary runway, 321, and the leadoff lines, which there's only 2 on 1735, that were faded and chipped and in need of repainting. I have received, we'll talk about it in the projects, but I've received all the quotes I think that we need at this time to get that done, but it wasn't something we could immediately take care of, like the whole bars that we did actually take care of. And then finally, categorical exclusion submittal preparation. So we are preparing the environmental process for doing anything at an airport that you're using federal funds for, or that will affect, create a change on your airport layout plan, which is typically federally funded, requires some level of environmental approval. The lowest level, I may have mentioned this to you last month, the lowest level is a categorical exclusion, where they're essentially routines, but it still requires the airport sponsor to submit that information to the environmental specialist within the district and say, here's what we're going to do. Like as an example, we're getting ready to do a categorical exclusion request on the runway mill and overlay that we're submitting into the AIP supplemental project. And so, you know, you would think nobody's going to say, nope, you can't fix the runway, but it's one of those things, one of those boxes that needs to be checked. The other item that we're submitting a categorical exclusion for is the new hangar, which I'll talk about here in a couple of minutes, that's been proposed, because it will essentially create a change on our ALP. And so that requires first an environmental approval by way of categorical exclusion, and then a pen and ink change to the ALP that then gets approved. So it's, nobody said it was going to be easy. But anyway, we work very closely and very well with the FAA, and this is just part of the process that we're doing. So the bottom line is, we've got 2 categorical exclusion letters that are being prepared right now for 2 different items that are coming up. So that's what's going on with the FAA and ADOT. Airport development and maintenance projects. So first, I would say that the draw side, I have good news, and I have bad news. Which do you want first? No, I'm just kidding.
You have to do a
forgive my
categorical
informality, Mr.
exclusion on that?
Yeah, we got it all fixed. Here's the good news. We are meeting next week, I believe Wednesday, with a representative from Haley and Aldrich, which is the engineering firm that is doing the site investigation. They have actually received some response from the Department of Justice on their work plan and change order that they have submitted. And so what our representative, his name's that's Pejman Ashragi, he said, hey, things are starting to move, we should talk. So we're going to meet with them next week, and talk about how we will potentially carry out phase 2. And if you recall, phase 2, which is being in the approval process right now, is to do more extensive core drilling to get the width and breadth and depth of the contamination, so that then the mitigation can be designed as far as the removal and replacement. So that's good news. I will speak to Pejman next week when we meet about the coming and presenting to the commission. I still think there's value to having someone that's wiser on this than I to present to you maybe a more comprehensive report on the whole draw site deal. Because, you know, I've been here only a few months. You know, I've been drinking from the fire hose since I've been here. I think I have a general understanding, but there's a lot of nuances that I can't even share with you. And of course, you know, we've lost some institutional knowledge in the transition. So my intention is to have that brought before the commission and presentation given on that. Runway. Okay, so we're in our approved capital expense budget this year is $150,000 for pavement preservation, and that includes crack seal on the runway and a restripe of the runway after the crack seal is done. We have received 3 quotes on the crack seal, and so we're getting very close on getting that executed. We've received 3 quotes or 4 on the striping. And so we're just about ready to get that executed. My intention is to do that as one standalone project, the runway. The budget on that was approximately $100,000, and we believe that we can get that done. Well, we will get that done for that amount of money. We may have to adjust some of the striping and do the most critical striping and leave some of the other for the future projects, like shoulder lines, for example. We also have $50,000 for apron seal coating in our capital budget, and so that we've also received 2 quotes on, possibly 3. I know we've received 2 quotes on, so we're getting closer on that. That'll be the next thing that we'll go into after we get the runway taken care of. I'm going to do them as separate projects apart. The runway work will require a closure of the runway for some period of days, and our intention is to close it not for 24-hour round-the-clock period, but to close it for a section of a few days. So anyway, we're working on that, and of course, as many of you know, we're working with the folks at the airport to make sure that we minimize the inconvenience to the users and make sure that what we're planning is the best thing that we can do. There's always going to be some inconvenience in any construction project, and it's worth it because of the results, but we try to make sure that's as painless as possible for our tenants and users. Striping, I mentioned. I'm not going to go over that again. Gates, we have $150,000 in the capital budget for improvements of the gates. Now, generally speaking, the gates are working well. We get a call from time to time, and that's probably one of the biggest service requests, one of the most frequent service requests that we get. And I put into the airport improvement program in our ASIP an upgrade of the gate system, which would include a network system that was all tied together and using a proximity card or some kind of access media to get in. But there are some improvements that we certainly can make, and we're working on those. One of the improvements that we've talked about is doing some additional paving, especially between the edges of the pavement that go through the gates and then out to the card reader. So when people are going through there, they don't have to.
The pit.
Yeah, exactly. So what I've actually got a price on is to do a taper, coming off of the edge of the pavement at the thing and then coming back on. And I've received some pricing on that, and I was pleasantly surprised. So I don't want to actually announce what that cost was because I've only got one quote at this time, and so I want to keep that, under my hat, if you will.
You mentioned the gate code versus a card. Wouldn't a card prevent any transient people from coming in and then getting a courtesy car, maybe being kept, having picked up, traveled into town, did some business, whatever, then returning, and they wouldn't be able to return to their aircraft? Is there provisions for that?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Amspoker, there are. As an example, we have a proximity card system at Glendale Airport, which both has a card reader and a keypad on certain gates, or on certain, primarily it's pedestrian gates.
Yeah.
So as an example, you can either use a proximity card or you can punch in the code that will allow you in and out of those pedestrian gates.
So you would do both then at certain gates?
I would,
Access?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Amspoker, it is something that we would make sure and consider in the design of the system. At this time, I don't know what the system will be, and we don't even know what kind of technologies might be available at the time that we actually do the project. But certainly we would consider that so as not to basically lock somebody out of the airport that had a legitimate right to be there. Yeah. But I do understand if you went only with a prox card, and that's the only way you could get in and out, and then you're not staffed part of the time, that could potentially be challenging for a transient pilot, yeah. But yes, so we will address that. A transient pilot would never have the same access, like, for example, driving access, because under the Part 139 requirements, we're required to train all drivers on the airport. I don't know, I've seen the driver training program, and it's a good driver training program that's been developed, but I don't know exactly how that's been implemented over the years. But the point is that if you're allowing somebody to drive on the airport, you're supposed to be training them. And of course, you don't have that opportunity with a transient pilot. So they'd never have the opportunity, most likely, to drive. But they would have an opportunity and legitimate access to the airport.
Thank you.
My pleasure, sir. So that's the gates. So we're, I think that's actually money well spent to do that at the gates, and we'll talk more once I get a little bit more information on that. And then finally, projects at the terminal, and we are, in fact, some of you may have seen this slide, but for those that have not, okay, I lied. stand by. Forgive my falling apart here on you. Terminal remodel concept. How about that? So this is what our architect, Selberg and Associates, has presented to us for the improvements to the terminal. As you know, the terminal remodel project is not, it's not really structural in nature. Most of what we're doing is for our electrical upgrade and then aesthetic improvements. I realize this is kind of a hard slide to read, especially from a distance. But the bottom line is we intend to open this room up back here. Right now, this is 2 rooms. There's a wall right there that we're going to take out, and this will be the new flight planning and pilot lounge. And then that's about, and then of course we'll upgrade anything that needs to be taken care of within the restroom facilities. And then the rest of it's going to be pretty much aesthetic. We're going to make some changes to the soffit in there and make it look a little less 1970. But unfortunately, we're probably going to make it look a little more 1945. So, you know, it's one of those things. The idea is that, number one, we bring it up to a appropriate standard. But the other idea is, as you no doubt know, we're looking at potentially creating a little bit of a destination and a motif and an environment reminiscent of the airport's history. So we're working on this. As part of the project, we're putting together the documents now for the bidding. Also, we are going to have to put a roof on it. That was recently discovered. But we're putting together the documents for the project bidding, and then we will, we've also are engaging an interior design consultant to help us with making it more like a World War II officer NCO club. So this is moving along. Nothing is done in municipal government quickly. At least that's been my experience for the past 30 years. But we are working on it, and the results are going to be very nice. Any questions on projects before I move on, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, one comment, Joe. A while back, we had a broken gate, and a bid was obtained from some outfit in Phoenix of $15,000, and I think it was fixed by Acton Welding, who was in the industrial park, for $1,500. And I've heard a little bit about some structural defects on the columns or something for the gates. I would sure ask them to bid if you've got anything of that nature. I don't know if they know anything about the electronics. That's usually a whole separate deal.
Yeah. Thank you. I will, we'll take that into consideration when we get to do any work. You know, generally speaking, the gates are, in my opinion, structurally sound, and they operate appropriately and effective. I'm talking about just from a perspective of opening, closing, and the motors that drive the opening and closing of them. The challenge that sometimes we have has more to do with the smart part, if you will. But yeah, we'll, any repairs, we certainly would like to have a local source for any one that's able to do that. I assume that we have some welding capability within our fleet shop and within our Public Works Division, the facilities group, but we certainly will investigate that. Okay. Next, airport hangar occupancy. So we have 39 T hangars, and 38 of them are occupied, and that includes one pending move-in right now. We had one person on our wait list decline a hangar, and one person on our wait list accept a hangar, and we've got another individual that's interested in a hangar, and we think that's going to move forward. So we have 38 occupied. So it means we have one vacant. That's one hangar in the D building that is currently vacant, and we have no one on the wait list at this time. Covered tie downs, all 10 are occupied, and there are 4 on the wait list. Executive hangars, all 5 are occupied, and we have 2 on the wait list. And I believe that takes care of our hangar occupancy. You had asked at our last meeting whether we were advertising. I actually saw a sign on the fence when I was doing my inspections this week. In fact, it was when I was headed to the EA meeting the other day that said hangars for rent. So sort of we're advertising on the fence, and it's also a sign that we could probably spruce up a little bit. If we don't get some wait list activity and, you know, have any other occupancies, yes, I think we will look at the opportunity, how we potentially could advertise. I think we need to be careful getting, like putting something out and, to the public and the world saying hangars for rent, and then we don't have any. That potentially could put us in a difficult situation just in the industry or with the flying community. Well, why the heck are you advertising? But I think it's something that we certainly will continue to look at. Questions on that?
The one vacant on the hangar, is that in the old
Yep,
hangar?
the D building, yeah.
Okay. And just real quick, what are those going for right now? What's the rate on that?
I believe it's 280 something, 282, something like that. And I believe the B and C buildings are 360 something,
360?
Yeah, 360 versus 280. That's pretty close, Mr. Commissioner.
All right, and then the execs go for how much?
500 and change. I apologize, I wasn't prepared to answer that. I'll
Yeah,
make
and we
sure.
only have 4 of those, right?
I'm sorry?
551, I think.
I'm sorry?
551, I think it is.
That sounds about right to me. 5 of them, actually, that are ours, that are fully, yep.
Thanks.
Other questions, members of the commission?
I do. Have you had a chance to look at the condition of the D hangars, the inside floor in particular? Because I've only seen a couple of them, but I've heard from some of the tenants they're in pretty poor condition, actually. It's my understanding those hangars were just built on old asphalt that was part of the ramp many, many years ago. And it's been raised as a concern that they're just not up to standard.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Gerlach, I have not looked inside the hangar to answer your first question, so I can't speak with authority. I also do understand that they are in much poorer condition than the other hangars that we have, and that's why they're actually priced at a differential. But I don't dispute that work could be done there. I think we'd have to do some cost-benefit analysis or return on investment as far as what's the best use of airport funds, because if they're safe, for example, and able to be used, then we may still have a responsibility. If they're unsafe, then we have a more urgent responsibility, if you will, higher priority.
Because as my understanding, somebody declined taking one of those that was on the wait list?
Well, the folks that are on the wait list are typically on the wait list for the B and C hangars, Mr. Commissioner. And that's why we have one vacant right now. But we did have somebody come in and rent one the other day. Just walked in, wasn't even on the wait list.
Yeah, I think, again, I guess my suggestion is that's why somebody would decline it, though.
Yes.
Is they're below probably normal standards that you would
Right.
want to take that, and the price differential may not be adequate to accept that hangar. So I think it may become a future agenda item to discuss hangars, Mr. Chairman. So, yeah, we'll probably want to engage that subject further, but I'd suggest maybe if somebody has time to take a peek at the conditions in the D section.
Sir.
The ease of movement on the doors is probably the biggest thing, and we had hangars similar to that in San Diego, and they were hung on rollers, and the rollers didn't get lubricated, and the bearings would go in them, and you almost had to slide them instead of roll them.
Yeah.
So they may just need some new rollers or greased, I don't know.
Okay. Let's see. Airport leasing development update. Actually do have a picture here. So, as I've mentioned to you in the past, we have a proposal. This is one of the items that we're working on the environmental approval for. This is on the site. This is the MCSO. Well, on the left there, that white building is the Mojave County Sheriff's Office hangar. This is the site where we recently tore down the hangar that's in the background there. That roof is no longer there. So the idea is to, on a site of approximately 16,000 square feet, build either an 80 by 80 or an 80 by 90, and they're kind of evaluating that right now. Do they want an extra 10 feet? Would it help them get more airplanes in there? And then an apron in front of it of either 60 or 70 feet deep, depending on the size of the hangar that they want to do. So that's what's been proposed, and that's what we're working on right now. We've provided a draft lease to the individual. One of the things that we've done has been changing all the documents, not as much in substance, but from a an authority perspective to the city of Kingman perspective. So we provided them with the draft lease. We've identified this site. We're working on the environmental approval with the FAA. And then they're planning they would like to get to building, which again, you know, it's not like we break any records in municipal government for getting things done.
Question. So that will leave us room to build another one, at least that big, next to it, on the east side,
So
correct?
Mr.
They're just gonna want that building footprint plus whatever margin they need? Okay.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Rucker, the extent here is kind of the white line, that white ticked line that goes around there. That is the size of the leasehold, and it's actually to where the red line is, because when I did
Okay,
this.
so we're gonna have room to
Right.
lease another parcel there next to
Correct.
it.
That is correct. However, my thought is that you don't lease that parcel, that you leave that parcel available for access to the rest of the site behind it. Because I can't show you in this photograph, but there's a large area behind it
Yeah.
that could be used for hangars. And
That's
so
true.
the reason, that originally, they would have come in and probably taken the whole 200-foot of frontage.
Yeah, the problem I have with it though is we're giving up valuable ramp side space for accesses, and that's, I can talk about that later. but
I fully agree.
Yeah.
There is a balance there.
Yeah. One other question, I don't know if you can reveal this or not, but are we still staying with the current land lease rates that we've had in the past for this?
That, right now, the last several leases have been done at 30 cents per square foot. That's what we're continuing with until such time
And
as.
that's what's being quoted to this
Affirmative, sir.
prospect?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Until such time as we would get either do a new market analysis or get an appraisal on the property. And I think our intention is to actually get appraisal and then come back. But yes, that's what we've proposed.
Joe, how much land is behind the red line to the street?
A lot, maybe more. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, that's another feeble attempt at humor, which I'm a little more feeble all the
And
time.
my concern is that if we put hangars back there, then we have to have a taxiway, and we've used up most of that space to the depth of that building for taxiway for rear access. And we're kind of throwing a lot of space away, I'm
We
afraid.
can drill down on that later when we address that as a separate agenda item.
Yeah, well, my thought is that the land that's behind it is much more valuable to the airport as aeronautical use that would have access to the airfield. And we do have a reasonable amount of still vacant land that has frontage along the ramp available. But I think if we use this as an access way to get, you could put a whole lot more hangars back behind it. And realizing that the airport would most likely have to put some infrastructure in, like a common.
Turn Flightline Drive into taxiway, access from Flightline.
Well, yeah, but I'm just thinking, I would, you could potentially have hangars, Commissioner Rucker, that would need some landside access. They wanted parking or some kind of public. Anyway, my thought is just that we've got a whole lot more land there that we can use other than just this, and it still has relative ramp access. We're only talking about, a couple hundred feet. So anyway, but I would agree that it's something that we should, actually, in my opinion, it's something that should be looked at in the master planning process, of which I would say that most, if not all of you, will have an opportunity to participate in that process on probably the technical advisory committee.
I would agree with that, Joe. And one other possibility is if the sheriff's hangar was built by the county when they owned the airport, I don't even know if they're paying rent. But they probably don't have a lease with a description. So if we took some of the space between to our, whatever our setback requirement is, and moved that building over closer to the sheriff's hangar, now we may very well be able to have a taxiway to the right of that hangar with hangars up against
Right.
the sideline that would come out to that taxiway. I hate to give up that much for, if an airplane of any size, we're gonna need 50, 60 feet for.
Correct.
For a taxiway, so we don't have a whole lot left.
Yeah.
My question would be, parking. They're gonna wanna be able to park cars and get into the building, is it gonna be on the left side or the rear side, or did you discuss that? I mean, over towards the sheriff's side, if they had a man door, they could get in, depending upon the fence gate or whatever, or if they were using the back of the building, which I think makes sense, to have a door back there, but then you're gonna be parking behind the building. Has that been discussed?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Brackett, yes, it has. And they essentially, because I proposed that as well, that we could move the hangar a little bit farther forward, use that area behind for parking. The indications that I've received from the folks that are interested in developing it is they're going to park their cars in the hangar. This isn't going to be a public, in other words, not a business hangar where you need parking. People are going to fly, they're going to pull the cars in the hangar after the airplane's out. And they wanted additional, as much room as possible in the front of the hangar as an apron.
It would sure be my recommendation to slow this down a bit until we do get our master plan worked out a little further, and obviously let them know. I would think if they're gonna take it, either lease some all of it, and like you say, this needs a lot more study, in my opinion, on the best use for that property.
I concur. Any other?
Well, you'll have I'm sure you, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to express your opinion. I would only, I don't want to say caution is not the right word. I would only comment that, we need to continue to build our revenues. And so, I think we've come up with a way to do that without foregoing the use of any land behind there.
Well, I won't disagree with you, but if we could get the county to go for a 20-foot strip off the side of their building, which would be their setback, and that's all, we'd pick up enough that I think it wouldn't be an issue.
Which is like instrument or multi-engine or those kinds of things, so a smaller operation. And we're working with them as well. That's a newer, I've only had one sort of casual conversation about that. And they have intended, they expressed that they would most likely not operate through the fence, but yet just off the field. So we're working on those. Those are kind of the three things that have been going on with regards to commercial activity at this time.
The operation that was going to require through the fence, I believe one of the reasons the last one left was because they were charged a $25 access fee every time they opened the gate. They go through the gate 10 times in a day. That can be pretty expensive. Would that still be in play, or would that be removed or dramatically reduced?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Amspoker, the current minimum standards actually have a through-the-fence agreement for commercial operations of $50 per month per aircraft. That's my understanding is what was being charged to the previous operator.
That's a big difference.
Sure is. In fact, I would be highly in favor of the $25 each time they go through the gate, because, for me, it's all about making the airport money.
Yeah.
But no, it's $50 per month. That's what's in our approved minimum standards and our approved fee structures that goes back to about 2006. That's what we've proposed, because that's what the rules are. And there's some disagreement with us and with the airport and the proposed operator, that they don't believe that that's appropriate. So we've based on some legal interpretation of legal and property rights. And so we've submitted that to the city attorney for an initial review. I've submitted everything, my opinions, the results of our meetings, all of the documents to the city attorney for review. And they're looking at that, and I'll have a follow-up meeting with the city attorney next week to have a sort of a face-to-face discussion and explain any questions he may have.
Okay, thank you.
Regarding that same question, when you say rules, it's my understanding these are policies that have been left in place from the previous administration. I'm curious, are there particular FAA requirements related to that operation of that business going through the fence?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Gerlach, The FAA would like all airports to have minimum standards and rules and regulations. And they encourage the development of those by all airports. During the process, they will typically ask to review those documents. They don't necessarily have an approval or a denial ability over them. They look more at that you're developing your rules and regulations, your minimum standards within the regulatory requirements of the advisory circulars and the grant assurances. And so, as an example, one of the grant assurances is you can't discriminate. And so you can't have minimum standards or rules that says only one of this thing can be on the airport. An FBO is an example where if another FBO wanted to come in and they thought they could make money, even if the airport thought, based on their statistical analysis, that business would fail, you're not allowed to say no and still remain within the spirit of the grant assurances. So, back to your original question, there is guidance on how these documents, what we call primary guiding documents for an airport, how these guiding documents are created, and that they do review them. And then, of course, anyone that has a complaint can make a complaint to the FAA through their, Part 16 process or others. So I hope I've answered your question. They don't say, thou shalt and must do thus and so. They say, this is a good idea for all airports. We think every airport ought to do it, and you've done it. We've looked at them. We think they're okay. Go forth and do good things. Back to your other assertion, these were documents that were within the Kingman Airport Authority realm. That is absolutely correct. They were developed and approved under the Kingman Airport Authority. All of the documents that are in effect at the time of the transition bind to the City of Kingman and remain in effect. So I'm not saying we wouldn't look at them in the future. In fact, they should be looked at with regularity. Your rules and regulations and your minimum standards should be reviewed on a regular basis. But they are, right now, that's what we got. And I will also say they're not dissimilar than most of us airports. We steal from one another on a regular basis. Somebody does something that works good, you go and you get that, and then you make it your own by changing whatever you need to change. And so what we have here is not at all dissimilar to what I've seen at the other airports that I've been involved with or other airports that I've been exposed to.
Okay, yeah, I do appreciate that, and I had heard that the policy was to maintain the existing contracts and agreements as they were for now, and I think that's something that's going to need to be looked at. The problem is that we feel a lot of these things did not produce results, the things that are in place, and I'm concerned that in our wanting to bring some sort of flight training to Kingman, we need to look at those things, and that may be part of the review process that's being discussed with this potential operator. But like I said, I feel we see what we got from the policies that were in place all this time, and hopefully that we're able to at least look at that and reevaluate the situation for the better of everybody involved with the airport.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Gerlach, I absolutely agree with you. All of our policies should be looked at on a regular basis. I think that you need to be careful. So there's two items that we need to be careful of. Number one is what precedent's been set and how people have been treated in the past. And if we choose to start treating people differently, we're going to have to be able to explain why we treat them differently. Now, you could say, well, it's a new airport operator. But I think you need to be careful of maintaining consistency. The other thing I would say is that I believe that commercial enterprises that operate and use the airport for making money have a responsibility to provide some compensation to the airport. Those same entities, those commercial operators, would not be doing it for free. And so, and the airport also has a responsibility to be as self-sufficient as possible and to earn as much money as reasonably possible. And so that's the only comment that I would make is I absolutely agree with you. We need to look at all of our documents from time to time. And, but we need to also look at it from a wise business perspective as well as a discriminatory perspective.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Joe, I have a question for you.
Sir, Mr. Chairman.
As you know, we have a lot of different leases with different terms. Some of them go back decades. since they're different, they could arguably be discriminatory. Now, there was good reason for whatever they had at the time, but they're different today. What I have told people is that we need to come up with a standard form that would apply to any of the commercial leases out there. Some property, for some reason, may be a little bit more valuable, but the terms should be the same. You can't go back and change an existing lease. They've got every right to stick to it. But if they have the option to take the new stuff or keep their old, then to me, the issue of discrimination goes out the door because they had the chance. Would you agree, or am I on the wrong track here?
No, Mr. Chairman, I would agree with what you say. I'm not certainly an authority on, because I have the luxury, have had always the luxury of having legal guidance, somebody to help me, keep me out of jail, if you will, which I kind of like being out of jail.
I have a question, Joe.
Yes.
Back on the same question, you know, when they started doing that $25 per gate opening and stuff, of course, I was appalled that that kind of thing would happen, and I thought there was some bias going on and stuff. But even at the $50 per airplane per month, I'm wondering if there's a real reason besides just making the airport money that you need to do that, whether it be insurance, extra insurance because they're crossing the road or something like that, or is it just an extra thing that they have to pay? Because I know they're going to have other expenses with the airport, and the airport's going to be making money from these guys, and we want to keep them interested and encourage them, and I wouldn't want to discourage somebody by charging them $500 a month for having 10 airplanes or something. If, you know, I mean, sure, most guys who's making money, that wouldn't make a lot of difference, but I still would like to see it where it's, they're all happy with that, you know.
Can I piggyback on that? And Janie,
Up to him.
I've heard this rumor all the time. Do you remember what that figure was? Back when it was Chebley's and when they came through the gate? That's what you're talking about, right? Do you remember the figure?
I don't remember $25. I remember
$50 is
Per month, per aircraft.
Correct. And
That's what's in our minimum standards.
Because I'm pretty darn sure that's what it was. The 25 per airplane is,
That's absurd.
Well, yeah,
Right.
there is a.
Joe, you brought up in one conversation what they were doing at another airport, which was totally correlated with use. And I'd never thought of that, but I think that's not a bad idea. Why don't you talk about that?
The City of Phoenix airports, in their minimum standards for flight training operators, have a per flight hour charge. It's, I think, around $2.10 an hour right now, per flight hour. That's wheels up time, it's not even engine time. But it is, you're right, it's very fairly applied to the more flight activity you have, the more you pay, and essentially the more flight activity you have, the more the revenues are being generated by the commercial operator. I think we certainly should look at that. In fact, I would even go further to say that right now, on airport flight operations, don't require a specific fee under our current approved minimum standards. There's a minimum standards that depicts and you know, expresses how the operators have to do and what the minimum standards they have to do, but there's not even a charge if you're operating on the field. And the theory behind that is you're either leasing space or you're paying for a tie down or something like that. However, there could be a situation where, and this I think absolutely, Mr. Chairman, should be looked at. You could have a situation, and I'm trying to take anything away from our customers, but as an example, a person that owned a hangar, that had some adequate office space in it, that met all the minimum standards, if you will, could essentially lease that to a flight training operator, and they could also store the aircraft there. And so all of the revenues, all of their costs are actually going to a tenant on the field. That's not necessarily there's anything wrong with that, but the airport isn't making anything other than the fuel flow, which, you know, for a light, most of the training aircraft, light single-engine aircraft, you're certainly not going to get rich on the fuel flow from, you know, even a busy flight operator with one airplane. So my argument would be, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, is that we ought to look at that. We ought to look at all of our rates and charges structure. I mean, I'm not trying to run business off, don't get me wrong. I want to see business thrive, and I think that it's important that our business partners be successful on the airfield. But I also think we need to consider that a loaf of bread isn't a quarter anymore, and, the airport needs to generate revenue to meet our needs, and we're committed to continue to making improvements, but that's a finite, there's only so much we can do unless we continue to enhance and increase our revenues. So forgive
Are you
my,
buying lottery tickets?
I haven't for years, and I probably have missed out on billions of dollars. Other questions, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission? Okay, resuming airport events, I'm going to go through the rest of my report pretty quickly because holy Moses, I realized when I reviewed the minutes from last month's meeting that I talked too much, and I don't know that there's anything any of us can do about that, but at least I'm conscious of it. So, airport events, once again, I want to thank you for coming out for our manager candidate meet and greet. We had that on 6 September, and on 30 August, we also had a council and stakeholder event at the airport where we invited members of the council. Councilmember Scott Steele came out for that. We did that, and then we had we had 16 members of our airport community that also came to that. So that was on 30 August, and we want to thank all the folks who came out and participated in that. And then, of course, the Kingman Air Fest is coming your way on 6 October. So that's the next event that we have planned there. As you know, it's sponsored and coordinated by our EAA chapter, and so that we're excited about that event that's coming up as well. And that planning is going quite well. Airport land use, I've made no progress. Like I said, I need to get hooked up with the Mojave County Development Services Group or whatever they are, so that we get on their list that they circulate developments within 5 miles of the airport to the airport for comment. I don't know that they will, I don't know that they won't, but we certainly want to be involved in that process. And then no complaints. In fact, the airport has received quite a few commendations and expressions of appreciation. So we've had no complaints, and quite the contrary. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, that endeth my very lengthy and windy report. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, go on to the old business, the remote control.
What about business park staff?
Business park staff report. Sure, we've got, we introduced Bennett before, but do you have a report for us?
Yes. Chairman Hayes, members of the commission, at any of these meetings, it'll either be Bennett or myself reporting on any updates on the economic development side, and that would certainly be on the airport industrial side. So I've asked Bennett today to embark on the first one, and so we will always present you with at least a short synopsis of what's going on that side of the fence. So.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Not going to go as long as Joe here, but we'll get through this pretty quickly. You're going to see some activity going on at the airport today. The Mojave Airport Drive, weed abatement, and work along the edge of the property going into the airport from Route 66 all the way to the stop sign is starting today, and so you'll see some workers out doing that. This will also include a project with the CAMA Group, which is the Kingman Area Mojave Manufacturing Association, set out to, we had some issues with some truck rollovers coming out of the airport, and one of the things that the city looked at doing was to get some signage up to notify the truckers to, the large trucks to slow down going into that turn so they would not tip over to the right side. And that sign has since been ordered, and we expect that sign to be delivered this week and hopefully be installed by the end of the week if we get it in soon enough. Some improvements that are going on. We have a property, the City of Kingman owns a property at 4905 Interstate Way. It's been kind of dilapidated and not maintained. We went in and did a lot of cleanup on the property, inside and outside. Some work on some rocks adjacent to the property, making it look well, has been going on. And we're currently negotiating a lease on that property as we speak, and we expect that to probably be leased by the end of the month. Not only are we making great strides on the monument sign that you've seen the business park properties going up, just last week we installed our first directional signs on Mojave Airport, and there are white signs with arrows directing people into the various businesses along the way. So you'll see more of those signs being installed and erected. August 30th, we participated in that site tour, and we gave Councilman Jamie a tour, as well as Jen Miles showed up. And what we were able to do is to give them some insight into a lot of the employment going on at the park, our current businesses, as well as the current properties that the city of Kingman owns there and could either lease or sale. In talking about those properties, what we are doing right now is compiling them, putting them into a format that we're going to then go out and market those properties, as well as we're going to create cost of doing business in Kingman at the industrial park and compare that to other communities, our competing sites, that when a potential business looks to locate here, they're also looking at other locations. And so we're going to give them a document that not only has our properties, but also how they can obviously save money by locating here versus our competing communities. Those marketing brochures are right now being produced, and hopefully we'll have those by the end of the month. Basically, when we work with these projects, we work with a lot of site selectors, as well as we work with the companies directly. And this, over the last month, we've got 4 projects that I've been working on. And those projects typically come in either through the state, or they'll call us directly through marketing that we do. And prior to coming to the city of Kingman, we did have a few projects that we were working on in the transition. The airport authority not being there, I was getting many of the leads coming in, and so I would be the one that was submitting for these properties that we already had. And through that, we currently have 4 active leads that we're in the process of working. 2 of those leads are within the industrial park for potential sites. Other 2 are adjacent to the city of Kingman, right outside the unincorporated areas, but we'll have a large workforce from the city and the surrounding areas that will be participating in that job market. These projects, we don't come out, we don't talk about the specifics at this time because we are competing against other areas, and we don't necessarily want them to know that we are their competition unless the site selectors already told them. So we're making a lot of inroads. We're very excited. Just so you guys know, the 3 sites that we have currently available, we have 16.27 acres. That's parcel number 310-21058. We have parcel 310-16054, which is a 47.5 acre parcel. That property is rail served, and we have 310-16054. That's 79.53 acres. That property is rail served as well. There will be different pricing on rail served property versus non-rail served property, and that's based upon appraisal. We are actually talking with various appraisers also at this point, and we think that we're going to probably would hope by the end of the month or early next month, trying to procure a new appraisal so we know about what the properties are worth, because we do feel we're going to get inquiries and people want to know what they might be getting into. So other than that, that's my update for today, and if I've missed anything, Gary can probably follow up. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you. We're really happy to have Bennett on our team here in the Planning and Economic Development Department. He's a great counterpart for me. I'd also think it's important that I recognize Bill DiGiulio, whose last day was last Friday, who did an extraordinarily good job on both the economic development as well as Bill during the periods of time where my site visits here, or the time that I spent on site was building, took care of an awful lot of airport things for us. And so I just wanted to recognize Bill for that service, both to the airport and the industrial park. This other little piece on here, this is off of last week's slide, the periodic reporting where I talked about things that we would be reporting on from time to time. You know, I've talked a little bit about the capital development grant activity. We haven't done any survey of customers and tenants, but I think still believe that's an extraordinarily good idea. That most likely will be taken on by my successor. Economic development, outreach, and marketing, as you notice, you commented on that, as well as website development. And that's another thing that Bennett brings to us. He's had a great deal of experience with website development and has brought forth some great websites that have been, very widely recognized and awarded. So I think Bennett, working in conjunction with our Information Technology Department, will really be able to bring forth a great product for us to use. I have also mentioned him the websites that the commissioners have brought to us in the past: Nampa, Idaho, Roswell, New Mexico, and so we'll be continuing to work on that. As with anything else, it's a matter of time and energy and availability. But I think we're really placed well for that website.
Do we have any time frame?
I do not, sir.
Bennett, any time frame?
Not yet.
Is it on? It's on. So I've gone out for some RFPs on the economic development side. And so I was looking at hoping to have all the content. This is the economic development side. There's two different websites. There's the Kingman airport site, and then there's economic development site that's going to be at the city as well. And so it will probably be a component of that. And the airport will be added into that, as how they fit in. I'm looking at the Nampa, Idaho, Gary mentioned to me, and also we talked, I think Roswell, New Mexico. There were some examples of sites that you guys liked on the airport side. Bids can come back. I've already got them back. I've probably got one more bid. We need to get 3 bids when you look at the cost of what they're going to run when you go through the procurement process. So I would say by January, you should be able to have a functioning operating site, potentially sooner depending on how much staff, because you have to put all the content in on that, and a lot of it on the economic development side, because there was no content, all has to be made. And the person who has to make that is right now me. And so we have to get that content on the airport side. As we transition with the new director, there's going to be a lot of time that's going to be invested in that. And so, I don't know if January is too far off in the distance or if that is something acceptable, but I think that would be conservative.
It's the first time we've heard a date. Well, it's just good to hear a general plan. I mean, the airport should be able to go up, I would think, before that. They don't have to go up at the same time, but it would be nice to have them. But they'll be congruent when they're done. And I know economic data back takes a while. Okay.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Brackett, our page is up, and it is what it is. I understand that, and I think we'll continue to add content to it, as some other things come at us. So we're not sitting completely still, or putting all our eggs on just seeking some additional help. So we're working on it.
Joe, a question kind of in the same direction here. I've always thought that the Kingman Airport was kind of the gateway to the Grand Canyon, and even though that's nothing official, maybe there's some way to kind of stick that out there somewhere.
I think it's a great idea. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Finger. So we can put it on the website. Once it's on the internet, it must be true.
Yeah.
So,
I have one more point. I'm sure all of you have seen the high voltage transmission lines and poles that have been put in the last few months. Well, Unisource has now started on a new substation. The transformers in the old station are about 1970, and they aren't even available anymore. So fortunately, none of those ever blew. But we're going to have a brand-new modern substation in the next 2 or 3 months. And they also built one over by the hospital. So they've really been upgrading their transmission equipment a great deal. And, we've had a lot of power failures in the airport, which, of course, the gates didn't work and so on. And sometimes they lasted quite a while. But I think those days are probably over. One reason is that it's a big loop now. And if one section goes out, they can feed it from the other way. So there's a huge difference in what we'll soon have.
Chairman Hayes, you are correct. It will double the capacity at the airport. It'll also provide additional capacity for the city of Kingman itself. And so that should be online maybe just shortly after the first of the year. And the other thing out there at the site is also the connecting point for the new solar project. So it just takes place just outside the airport. And one other thing that both Joe and Bennett mentioned briefly, it was those lights were all owned by Unisource on the flight line there.
Oh, yeah.
And so that new conduit is in place. That wire is being pulled, I believe, as we speak. And so that will all be taken care of along with the new feed out to the field. So unfortunately, they did like many companies in the old days. They put in direct buried that was supposed to last forever. It didn't, so that's why you saw the new conduit coming across in front of the terminal and everything, so.
they're working on that actually today, the lighting, the apron lighting. And then tomorrow, I believe they start pulling the new conductor to the VOR.
Right. I guess CareFlight has been the biggest complainer about not enough light out there.
Yep.
Okay, now we get to the remote control aircraft. You want to give your portion of that, and then we'll get some comments?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. So this is an old business now. It was last month's new business, remote control aircraft operations site. And this is just, this slide actually was one of the slides we used last month. Just tells a little bit about it. It existed for over 20 years. A lot of improvements made by the local AMA chapter. No written agreement or leases in place. And that the only documents that we were able to locate were the club charter and insurance certificates in the file there. And certainly there have been discussions back and forth over the years, and I've seen some email even as current as last year or even earlier this year in 2018, where there was discussions about potentially developing a lease. So what we're at right now is, and this is what I propose to you, I've got a whole lot to say. One thing I will say is I've given each of you, you'd asked at last month's meeting for some additional information. So at each of your places was a packet that contained some information on AMA clubs, their chartering policies, acquiring a flying site, keeping a flying site, and then their safety procedures, which talks about the rules and regulations. One of the things I did not include is the advisory circular on remote control aircraft and how remote control aircraft and airports get along, and I apologize for that. I just didn't think about it. And then the other thing is last month that was proposed, the folks that were here gave out this flyer, which I think is a great resource to talk about sort of the chronological history of how the field developed and where they are today and some of the challenges that they're experiencing within their organization. And the only thing I would say as I read through this, the only thing that I would consider that I would just comment on was that they make the statement that they're a tenant of the field alongside and just like the other for-profit entities out there. And while certainly they've been a resident and an operator on the field for a long time, there has been a general agreement. I don't know that I'd classify them as a tenant because there's no written. And it seems a small thing. I just mentioned that other than that, I generally agree with what's been expressed here by them. So here's where we are, and here's what I make this comment to you because I assume that either at the next meeting or the following meeting. The item today is just for information and discussion, another item for information and discussion. At some point, we need to make some determinations to how we go forward. And so this first point of question of general policy, I think it needs to be determined by the airport, as a matter of policy of whether we want to continue to have this activity on the field. I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't, but that's a decision that we certainly need to make, and the first decision we need to make before we do anything else. The next thing is we need to come up with some elements of a formal operational agreement and regulations. Now, as I said, there are some FAA guidance and advisory circulars that talk about what the requirements are for the modeling community. Really, it's amateur aircraft operators, and how they interact with the, but there's not a lot of there's some good guidance in there, but there's not a lot of regulation, which is okay. We can develop our own regulations, and they don't have to be anything other than really what the advisory circular says is that as long as the modelers are operating in accordance with the AMA rules and regulations, that's good. And that's good enough for us too, generally speaking. I think we need to determine, because this land has been used for more than 20 years without any compensation. And as I mentioned, it's 720,000 square feet. That's a lot of airport land. And we need to determine what the lease rate would be for this land. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, there's FAA guidance on establishing your rates and charges, and we can look at that and investigate as to whether there's the educational and community benefit elements of this allow us to reduce our standard rate. And I think that's something that we need to come up with. And then, since there are two entities that are currently involved in the field, and I say there are two entities, there's the original AMA chapter that has been there for a long time, and then there's the other faction that has broken off from them. The other faction had actually proposed and submitted a letter to the airport last either winter or fall that they were trying to actually contract to get a lease in place for the use. So we've got two definite people who are interested in the field, and so because of that, I think we need to perhaps use an RFP process. If we do determine that we want to continue, and we do determine, how we want to continue, that we potentially put it out for an RFP, whoever would like to propose to use, and then we could evaluate those based on established evaluation criteria of both the compensation that's being suggested as well as what's being proposed, how much community benefit there is, those kinds of things. So I think it would be, now that we've got two people involved, and the reason I say that is because, or two entities involved, the reason I say that is there has been no formal agreement. There's been a kind of an informal verbal agreement. But we've now had two people that have expressed interest. And so because of some of the grant assurances, we need to make sure that we're using competition and not discriminating. And so we need to think about doing an RFP process for the field. And then I think once we sort of determine how we want to go, I think we should close the field to the users until such time as we've either made a decision we're not going to have the activity on the field, or we've made a decision that we're going to go through either a competitive process or something. And in the meantime, I think we should close the field for use while we're going through that process. And I think that's another element that we need to make sure we're not providing any discriminatory. In other words, or if we leave it open, we should make sure that anybody who's interested has the right to use it. Just because if we're going to go through a competitive process, we want to make sure nobody can come back later and say, well, they had an unfair advantage. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, that's my sort of just update report on the remote control field. We're going to continue working on it. I'm hopeful that in October we maybe can bring something for a decision, but I'll be quite honest with you, I'm not sure with all the stuff that's going on. This may go into, the November meeting, but we'll certainly see. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, sir.
First question I have right out of the barrel. Is there activity out there now?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Rucker, there is.
Okay. Second question. You said you had an insurance document on file. Do we know it's actually in effect, and are we named additional insured, and is there a hold harmless agreement and all that?
There's not any hold harmless or other indemnification, Mr. Commissioner Rucker. There is insurance that I think one of them that we have does have the city of Kingman listed, and the other one may have the Kingman.
Has someone actually contacted this insurance company and verified
no, sir.
that Kingman Airport is covered? I would sure recommend that.
Okay.
Yeah, Because I'm just looking at the paperwork you gave us on the AMA Club Charter Guide, 11 of 16 here, and there are some pretty important questions that need to be answered here, and we need to make sure that their application was answered accurately. Does your club have a formal use agreement with the landowner? How do we know that was checked properly?
Right.
So I think we ought to do our diligence making sure we are covered.
I would
for
agree.
insurance right
In
now.
fact, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Rucker, in consideration of that, you know, maybe it's prudent for us to.
There's 3 times it asked, do you have an agreement? Do you have a written agreement? Are you within 5 miles of an airport? How do we know these boxes got checked accurately?
Right.
And that we are really covered?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
I would hate to close the thing to people that are actively using it, especially the nicer weather is coming up. But I agree with Mr. Rucker, those items need to be resolved, even if it's a temporary use permit, you know, with $1 a year lease rate, just to where it complies with the requirements of the insurance company. And we are in fact a beneficiary at that point in time. So if all that can be worked out and they're using it, I don't see a reason why they can't continue to use it till we get through with this process, because as you say, it could take a couple, 3 months maybe.
Another issue is that this organization needs to police access and use of that, because what if a non-AMA member is out there flying? They're not covered under this insurance policy, correct? You can answer that question when you have an opportunity to speak.
Mr. Chairman, talking beyond me, okay, I apologize. Yeah, well, right now it is being controlled, at least to the extent there is a locked gate.
Locked, yes, it's locked.
That is operated by the current user, which is the AMA 969, I believe it is, the local chapter of the Kingman Modelers. And so they are essentially policing it, and they've assured us, here again informally, that they're ensuring compliance with all of the AMA requirements. So I agree. Believe me, all of these questions have come up, Commissioner, you know, when I have first discovered what we had on our hands here.
I'm the kind of person that I work in risk.
Yep.
And I always think, what can go wrong?
Yep.
That's what I get paid for.
Yep, good.
I have a question and a comment about this. You mentioned that in the file, there is a club charter and insurance certificates.
Affirmative.
Are they all from the one organization at this time?
They were all from the one, in fact, I do have those here. They were all from the one, and then subsequently, we received from the others, from the Golden Eagles. So everything we had up at the point when I first started investigating was all Kingman Modelers. And their charter is in here. The most recent one looks like, well, I don't know. And then the certificate holder is Kingman Airport, so that's the additional insured. So that's a good thing. Some of the others are Kingman Airport Authority. I think I may have lost the entirety of your question, Commissioner Gurley, forgive me.
Mainly, I was just curious if there was one or more entities
so
that have provided
was
those
just
documents.
the one, and then now the others have supplied the same information, a charter. And my position was, everything I had at the time that I started investigating was all on the one side, and realizing that I'd received phone calls and emails from both sides saying, you know, there's this issue. But I came down on, this is all we had at that time. If we're going to continue, we need to continue with these people. They need to be the ones making the decisions, because they're the ones that are indemnifying us and providing us with insurance coverage. And so then subsequently, I got the other two, Commissioner.
Okay, there were a couple things. I've actually made phone calls to other groups in other parts of the country regarding this, and it seems at least there's kind of a standard approach in which a single club runs an airfield in this type of scenario, but they generally allow other AMA users to operate there as long as they abide by the rules. And that's just been, I just did a very quick survey of calling a couple of different groups, one of another field I knew about back east, and that seems to at least be the general concept. But of course, the details are always where the problems come if there's any disagreement. Another thing that came up, I had a couple of pilots that expressed concern about operation of all three airfields the one on airport property, and there are two across the street from airport property. I specifically asked them to either provide written documentation or comment about any issues they've had. They've anecdotally claimed there were safety hazards involved, at least in a couple of times. Unfortunately, I do not see any of those people present, nor have I seen anything submitted. But I've encouraged them, if they have an issue, to step forward with it. I personally have not had any issues, and I operate an aircraft in that area on a regular basis. So that's all I have for you. Thanks.
I think we should hear from those guys, and we can discuss this some more, or do you want to keep up the questions and discussion?
Let's hear from them.
Okay, first one I've got is Joe Wilson.
John?
John Wilson, oh, excuse me, yes, John Wilson.
4 years ago, all the modelers, using the term for people that fly model airplanes, not the club. 4 years ago, the people flying across the highway were all members of Kingman modelers. There was only one fly site. Were I a full-scale pilot, I would certainly have at least a momentary anxiety each time I flew over any RC park, because if they're not compliant with their guidelines of 400 feet and your guidelines are 500 or 800, there's a serious potential consequence. So I can understand the anxiety of flying over these sites, and I can see the purpose of having these sites consolidated into one. It was one. That club's had consistent management. The modelers have had consistent management for a number of years. Each of these two clubs that are described in the brochure are described as having left to race or to run their airplanes rustically on dirt, which tears the heck out of them. There's a reason those two clubs are over there. Now, as far as the indemnification and the insurance, the indemnification and insurance began, I believe, for the Kingman Golden Eagles was November 26th of 2017, at which time, with full consent of KAA and Robert Riley, a second club was sponsored for that site. That's considered our home site. Since shortly after that, we've literally been locked out. The sheriff came and said it was a civil issue. Mr. Riley came down and actually said, if the two clubs that belong here can't get along, then we close it. And it was closed until management changed. And then it spontaneously became open. Now, I'll admit, Mr. Husband has spent a lot of time listening to model airplane flyers. And he came in and he had to take what was on file. But in fact, in reality, there are somewhere in that building, unless Mr. Riley took them with him, copies of insurance indemnification certificates, copies of the charter, and copies of the Golden Eagles application to lease. That was all done on the premise that if we could lease the site, we would willingly let the Kingman modelers continue to fly there. The Golden Eagles is an open club. There's no vote to membership. Anybody in town that has interest in aviation can join. That's completely different than a closed club that has a voting membership. So there's a lot more to this than just there's been one club there 25 years. And I really encourage Mr. Chairman and commissioners that this be investigated thoroughly, so that the outcome that comes out is that people in Kingman that can be inspired or have desire to fly model airplanes have a place to do it. It's a shame that there's 3 sites within a mile of each other. That's neither here nor there at this particular second. But if this does go out for RFP, certainly the Golden Eagles, which is the largest club in town, will be interested in bidding on that. And we would encourage, because it is a closed field and it's locked and it's public land, that the site be closed until it's settled. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, Boyd Hunt?
You pretty much covered it.
You guys are the other group. You have a speaker? Yeah, I didn't fill out. Okay, well, come up and identify yourself.
Sam Aiken, Kingman Modelers 969. I'm the president of the club. We do accept members, and we don't consider ourselves a closed club, although we do close and lock the gate because we don't want vandals, and people who are not supposed to be there and would negate our insurance if they were on the site. We can have guests, and we follow the AMA rules very closely, especially when it comes to other aircraft in the area. Our rules are, if there's another aircraft in the area, you get down on the ground.
You're speaking about a full-size airplane?
Yes, if there's full-size airplane in the area. I'll answer any questions you guys may have. I'm sure you guys have questions for me.
Who invested the money?
What?
Who invested the money to build the facility that's there?
The club invested the money. We also got money from businesses and stuff in town and people that donated money to build it.
Okay, so you invested and built the one that's there, and the other two clubs invested and built the ones where they are?
Yes, sir. Well, actually, John Wilson paid quite a bit out of his own pocket for his own field.
Because I was expelled from yours.
Did you invest in the other clubs, just as a question?
No.
Okay.
Is there an estimated value of the improvements that were done on the property, or at least the money spent to make those improvements?
We were somewhere north of $30,000, like $36,000 or something, with the concrete and the apron and everything that was put down.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, can you give us an idea what some of these clubs across the country are paying for land use agreements? Just on one end of the spectrum to the other, low side, high side?
There's some that do pay, and I don't know what they pay, but a lot of clubs, they don't have a lot of money. If they get money, they get it from donations. There's clubs that operate at parks for counties and stuff, and they operate for free, but what they do provide is they provide the insurance for the county park, and they provide a enforcement agency, for lack of a better word. They enforce the rules at that air site, so no one else can come on there and fly irresponsibly. And they also check to be sure everybody's AMA members, and they have all the proper identification on their aircraft and on themselves.
How is Havasu handled?
Havasu?
Yeah.
It's donated by the city. The Havasu Club operates it.
So the city actually built the facility?
I don't know if I don't think the city built the facility. I think the club themselves put in the facility. The city just lets them operate there for free.
It's a city land?
Yes, it is. It's in the city park. There's also one down by the water that they have it's city park, but they let them operate there for nothing.
Is that for seaplanes? Do they have little seaplanes?
Yes, they actually have float planes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, they used to have
Boats, too.
And they are getting ready, I don't know the date, but they're getting ready to have a float plane fly down there. They have a yearly event.
Do they also fly jets?
Not off the water.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yes, they do fly jets down there as well.
And you guys do also?
Yes. But you have to be specially trained. You have to be signed off by someone that can sign you off with a jet waiver. So currently, we only have 2 people that have jet waivers.
Okay, can I get us
And
back
if you
on
don't have
track?
that, you can't fly.
One more question. Is your desire, the two factions here, to use the same facility, to share this facility? What do you think? Do you have the wherewithal to get along to do that? I'm not sensing that vibe right now between you two. How in the world would you work that out? Okay.
5 years ago, I was scheduled to speak, he can stay up there. 25 years ago, I put in that field under the condition with the city manager that it be beneficial to the community. I paid for all the leveling of the land, I paid for the fencing, I paid for all of the remodded area.
Okay.
I also contributed extra cash, thousands of dollars into the club to pay their bills. I also recently, in the last few years, became a lifetime membership. And the only reason that these people that paid for all of this went over across the field is because the modelers were having somewhat of a problem following their own bylaws and alienating other people. I will state unequivocally, when it comes to this sport, I don't know anybody that really has any problem with the flying, actually flying the models. And matter of fact, many of the modelers that we are having a problem with used to be good friends of mine. And I don't see why we can't work it out.
Okay.
But what happened is, it was alienation every few years.
Okay.
20 people. would-
All right, we don't, I'm sorry, I asked for your opinion, but the thing is that we'll try to keep this choked down, because we're gonna have a lot of time to talk on it later. But the statement I wanted to make is that you cannot burden our airport manager with being the referee between you two.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he seconds that. And it's not gonna be our burden to clear up this spat between you either, so. And if we keep sensing this, we're not gonna be all that willing to maybe allow two factions to use it. We'll go one, and that'll come out in the RFP.
Where we came to answer your question
Okay.
is, until the city took over, is no one could use the field until we could sit down and work out our problems.
Okay.
And that seemed to be the only way to get communications going, to be able to work out our problems.
You had a
So-
guy.
It sounds like we need to almost get back to that. You have one more comment?
Although that's
No,
not,
no,
He
fella
had
in
his
the back
hand up
there.
in the back.
Just a second, Chairman Hayes.
Please come up.
Chairman Hayes, we need to have this gentleman identify himself for the record so that
Sure.
you can.
Come up the microphone.
Each one of you the gentleman that just spoke. Thank you. Okay, the same thing. Thank you.
He was identified on the original sheet.
As the secretary of.
What is your name?
My name is James Lummel, Secretary Kingman Modelers Inc. Sorry. James Lummel, Secretary Kingman Modelers Inc. Just based on what Boyd was saying, I want to point out that they've decided to pursue a legal action, so we're best off not discussing anything concerning the expulsions or anything like that here. The other thing that I would like to say is concerning the insurance, and that is it's standard AMA site insurance that covers both the Kingman Airport Authority and specifically listed as the city of Kingman as well. So we're covering both entities, although only one actually survives anymore and stuff like that. I just want to make the clarifications on that. I'll answer any questions, but I'd like to put our president back on for you, if you don't mind.
There's litigation still pending between the two groups?
At this point, it's not litigation. However, they've contracted a lawyer to pursue the dispute about their expulsions and stuff. So we definitely cannot comment on anything like that right now.
I have a question here, and I understand where Mr. Boyd, is it? Where you're coming from with all the financial investment you have and everything, and 25 years ago and stuff. Is there any chance that, like, both clubs could, like, be just dissolved, start over, everybody agree on electing officers of naming it something new or something when you get your other legal problems stated out, so you can all, like, get along? Because you all have the same goal here.
May I speak to that? We did, John Wilson of Gold Eagles, we did provide to Mr. Hubbard an example of a program that would allow the RC modelers in the community as a combined unit to function.
Okay.
Yes.
Joe?
I just want to comment on, too, that is correct. Mr. Wilson has provided me with a proposal of how it could work with two clubs. My position, Mr. Chairman, and speaking directly to Mr. Rucker's, Commissioner Rucker's point is, the airport, it is in our best interest to deal with one entity.
Yes.
And so one entity needs to be signatory to an agreement, and then we could certainly allow for them to propose how they would use others. But my position is, it would be very challenging to have operating agreements with multiple users for the same site. That's the first item. And the second item, Mr. Chairman, I can't recall who asked about the improvements that were made. This is a personal property tax notice that's been provided by the Kingman Modelers 969. And this lists the value, evidently they're paying taxes on their improvements. And this lists the value, the assessed value of the improvements, full cash at $11,942, and then we all know that assessed value and real value is different, but that's, just to speak to that specific item, Mr. Chairman.
I have a question. According to what we've read here, you police yourselves. What type of enforcement action is there if somebody should break elevation rules or any other club rules? How does that go about?
Well, we have a AMA safety officer, which is separate from our club board, okay? And he issues a verbal warning the first time. After that, after the first time, the second warning is written, and it is a 30-day suspension from operating at the field, and the third time can lead to total expulsion. Now, if there's any, in this time, if there's any retaliation, it's grounds for immediate expulsion from the club and from the field.
Okay. How do you folks enforce those rules?
The basic guidelines for enforcement are recommendations from the AMA that most clubs accept. We follow the same practices in terms of safety violation, specifically flying safety violations. Follow the same
So
Okay.
you have a designated person that does the same thing like they do?
Yes,
So you have the same set of rules, different enforcement officer, but the same objectives.
yes.
Okay, I guess my follow-up question then to both groups is, have you had any violations? And if so, what were the consequences? And I'll ask both groups.
Yes, we have had violations, and we had expulsions because of the violations.
Okay.
Yeah, 8 people were expelled for violations. One of them never flown. The 8 people.
From your group?
Yes. While we were still models.
Well, the question was, has your group
Oh, no, I digress to the fact that I was expelled.
You were one of the ones expelled from their group,
Correct.
as you were as well.
Can we ask what kind of violations we're talking about? How serious?
Nothing. We don't know.
So were they safety violations?
Not that we've been told.
No warning.
There, I can say that there were multiple violations, including violations of the former airport authorities rules that led to these.
Okay. I see.
And that's as far as I can go right now.
I'm willing, as an expelled member, to find out, to authorize him. I'd like to hear what I did.
Let's move on, Carl.
Yeah, I don't think, we've already got, there's lawyers involved, and I understand the reticence. I don't have the knife to cut the Gordian knot. I could easily state that in a little less beneficial way. But I think I would go along with Joe that we need to have one group that gets along with one set of rules that gets enforced. I know you have had criminal problems out there where people were breaking in and stealing things. You're all by yourself. You don't need any enemies, that's for darn sure. So I would hope you can find a way to work this out. I mean, you guys invested in, and apparently a third group that isn't here invested in a bunch of money in another facility. It seems kind of a waste to me, but that's just my opinion. So I think you've heard the airport's position, and I don't know that anybody here is particularly inclined to want to be the referee.
Well, in fact, some of their members are still members of our club. And the Fun Flyers, their former president is, as soon as his, gets his dad dealt with, his dad's having problems, he's coming over and joining our club.
Well,
So we're not a closed club.
that's all great, and I don't know how it can be worked out, and I don't know about compatibility. You know, sounds like you could have compatibility issues between Cubs and Jets. We certainly would at the airport trying to use them the same runway at the same time. So there's a lot of issues that I can understand might be there that I have no idea about, and maybe, you know, it's somebody's drinking the wrong kind of beer. I don't know.
Well, there's no drinking at the field,
okay.
absolutely.
Okay, the wrong kind of soft drink then. How's that?
Yeah.
But
Mr. Chairman?
does anybody have a solution here?
I move that we table this until our next meeting.
It was just for discussion. anyway.
Yeah, discussion and information
And-
only, no action can be taken.
Feel free to make a proposal to Job, but don't expect him to be the referee.
Is there a possibility both of you could agree on one single person who would be a mediator to try to work things out for you? Because we, of course, can't be involved in any of that.
We tried that with the former airport authority. The Eagles would not, we made a proposal, the Eagles wouldn't come to the table. And that's why the airport authority says, you know what, they can stay out, you guys can have the field back. And that's why he gave it back to, gave it specifically to us, is because.
I think the answer may be no.
Okay, next item.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
sorry.
but we'll move on, and, you know, if it comes down to where somebody just doesn't want to play ball unless they can be chief, I think if, you know, that shows up, that we probably have a solution for that. But otherwise, I think hopefully you can come up with a way to where all of you can get along and use the facility. It's a nice facility. It's a shame.
Can I just ask real quick, is that I agree with you. Grown men with a sport like ours, they should be able to work things out. But right now, anytime we talk to the modelers, it's always, we in charge, we have the site, you're locked out, you cannot fly here, we'll kick you out, we'll call the sheriff.
Okay, I understand that, and
If they're open and they're in control of
I don't think they think that right this minute, if they've been listening. So hopefully an effort will be made to do something.
Yeah, Mr.
Okay?
Chairman?
Yes.
I was just going to say, us as a group here, we can't resolve the inter-club dispute, but something that will have to be done is to figure out the use agreement, including fees involved, and as well as policy or operational agreements related to the airport and aviation activities. So those are things that are going to have to be resolved. I'm not sure what the answer is to the dispute side of it, so.
Well, there's one other point that all of you should be aware of. From the last I saw, the acreage that's been submitted to the FAA for release for the next section of industrial development, you know, that's not won't be part of the airport anymore. Right now, it is part of the airport, is the area which would include you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that may be a long time getting developed and sold, but it would at least be an industrial park status then instead of an airport status. And, you know, obviously if tenants are not too far away or sales are not too far away, this lease is not gonna be too long-term, and, you don't wanna put another $30,000 in it.
Exactly.
And that would be true, regardless of who ends up with it. I would have thought they might have gone the other way, but this is where the utilities are, so this is, and there is a road, although it's dirt, there's a right-of-way. So I'd keep that in mind too. I don't know how fast we're gonna grow. May not grow at all. We don't get some freeway interchanges built. So, is that it? All right,
So as
we'll
I
move on.
mentioned when we started, Mr. Chairman, we'll put something together and bring it back, and I wholly agree. My focus is on the use of the property, developing some rules, written regulations, and an agreement. It's been challenging for me to stay out from between, and it is consuming a not insignificant amount of my time.
I understand.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Well, we thank you for the time you spent, but
That's
present the proposals that you have, and hopefully you guys can come up with a way.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, master plan update and equipment acquisition. This was already sent to the council. Gary asked me about that, and I said, we're not going to object to this stuff, that it's got to be done, but just because it's one of those kind of items that should have come before the commission, because of the scheduling and time, it just didn't happen that way this time. I wanted to bring it back so that everybody was aware of it, and if somebody really doesn't like voting for it, well then, we'll listen to your opinion, but it's a done deal already. So we don't have to take a vote, but at least if you've got any objections. So you want to present those?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yeah, both of these items have, and I'll explain a little bit about how they, it is our intention that things that are going to be going to council for approval will come through this board and have your opportunity to comment and make your recommendation to the city council. The master plan update, we took the executed grant agreement that we had gotten from the FAA to council because it had to be approved before it could be signed. And in those cases, you want to make sure and move quickly, as I mentioned. And so that just came up. And then the other thing that came up was we discovered that the agreement, the authorization of services by the airport authority to the consultant that the grant was based on had never been executed. And it had been approved by their board, but it was at the time approaching the transition, and I think it just fell through the cracks. It was approved, wasn't signed and returned. So in order for us to actually continue, we needed to get that authorization of services signed and returned. And so I took that to the city council last Tuesday for their approval to do that. And so, I fully agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that we should be bringing things here that are appropriate and that are going to go to council, and that it was only timing in both cases, actually, that led us in this direction. So, and actually, I put these items on here with a subtext for information and just possible action, and I don't know what happened to that. So you can, well, I don't know if you can or can't take action, but I had put that information in my original thing. So, action is not required, I guess I should say, but you could, perhaps. So the master plan update was approved at last week's city council, and it also has been signed by the city manager and returned to the consultant. I have in my mailbox right now a notice to proceed, a letter that I'll be sending to the master plan consultant, Kaufman Associates. Once that's done and submitted, we're down the road. Now, I still have said to the master plan consultant that we want to only begin preliminarily with the things that make sense, the inventory and some of the research and fact-finding, not with the strategic elements that I want to wait until my successor is on board to start that. But that's going to happen, within the appropriate time frame anyway now. So that's that. The other item was the airport equipment acquisition. As I mentioned earlier, or I think I mentioned, we had $100,000 in the capital budget to acquire a tractor and mower. We acquired the mower, a used mower, a good used New Holland mower, for about 40-some thousand dollars. That did not have to go to council. That's been approved. That's actually, we're expecting delivery of that at any time. The other item was the Tiger flail mower, and I want to thank Commissioner Vice Chair Brackett for actually helping us find the right equipment. This actually came out at about $60,000, and so it was over 50 and needed to go to council, and we needed to get it. There's a 60-day lead time on this item. And once we actually issue them a PO, the manufacturing delivery time is something on the order of 60 days. So we wanted to get this done as quickly as possible. So that also went to council last week on the consent agenda for the flail mower, and that we're waiting on the PO to be issued right now, but all the approvals have taken place. So once again, it is our intention to bring these items to you. There's nothing that I'm aware of right now that's going to be going to council. But I know that some of these projects that we're going to do, especially as we get to the selection of a contractor and getting engaged in a contract with a contractor, will be over the $50,000 limit. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's where we are on those two agenda items.
Would you explain, Joe, the difference between this whale mower and the mower that you've got, both in the speed, the width, and, I mean, we're talking huge differences here.
We actually have a flail mower attached to our existing Kubota tractor, which has about, I think it's about a 90-inch cutting width, with a little less than 8 feet. And so that, but it's the same type. It's a flail type, so you got a drum with flails on it as opposed to a rotary cutter that cuts like this. Flail mower is much better in our environment and the type of mowing that we do. So anyway, this is actually about an 18-foot cut mower. So between this and the spraying that we've done to get good kill around our lights and sign bases, we'll cut our mowing time down to, I mean, in theory, it's a third, but it's at least a half that we're going to be able to get. So the point is this is and not only is it a much wider mower, it's a very, you know, we actually bought we could have bought a cheaper mower, but this mower is actually designed for the type of environment that we mow in, as well as doesn't have some of the frailties that we were concerned about with some of the lesser priced mowers, including just as an example, one of the mowers had its cooling, the way it cooled hydraulic fluid was to run the lines through under the deck, so that I mean, and it's not like they were in the flail path, but the point is it was, you know, that was kind of a vulnerability for us. Right. So anyway, you know, we felt like we got a really good product that's going to save us a lot of labor time, and there's a lot of mowing to do. In fact, our existing mower has been down for coming up on our second or third week now because we just kind of mowed it to death. So we're looking forward to it, and and here again, I want to commend you know, Vice Chair Brackett for actually steering us on to this particular product. So,
You need to pick any rocks up out there? I mean, is the surface area good for this indefinitely?
Generally speaking, I mean, you know, nothing lasts forever, either equipment or ground, but.
No, but as far as it's suitable for all of that area?
Very much so, yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, as I mentioned, these items have both been approved by council last week's council meeting, but I did want to bring them to you and provide the information that you would have gotten on the front end.
Okay. Next item, announcements by commission members. Anybody have any announcements?
Thank you for the lunch.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I have two announcements.
Okay.
One is, and I don't know if the gentleman had left a speaker's card.
No, he didn't, and they left.
I know. I'm assuming they had to get back, but I just will scan this and send it to you. But basically, it's a fundraising thing for Kingman High School. It was dropped off. I assume that was John Veninga, who's the assistant principal and athletic director. But they're doing a fundraiser October 1st, third annual First Responders Luncheon at Graves U-Haul, October 1st. So I will submit this to our very competent staff, and we can make it part of the, I guess we can make it part of the record. I just make it part of the record. The other thing, forgive me, was Yeah, it's the suggestions that I had from our last meeting were that we have the master plan available, Vice Chair, and that actually I've loaded the master plan, the airport layout plan, a couple other little items on this computer, as well as I'll have it on a thumb drive with me in the past, so those resource materials will be available to us. We talked about the website, and then the AMA stuff that I submitted to you, that was also a request at the last meeting, so those were just the items from our last meeting that I wanted to follow up on.
Excellent job.
Well, thank you.
Things are progressing fine. I hope you have some help and somebody to tutor pretty quick.
Thank you.
Any announcement on that, Gary?
We are discussing it, we'll be discussing it this afternoon.
Okay,
So
so.
we'll- at least,
Sue?
yeah. We take it very seriously, believe me.
But I thank you, Commissioner Hayes, and I'm having a wonderful time here. It's a great place to work.
Well, believe me, we're all very happy you're here. All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.